What we're going to do today is take a look at how to create a new rate using our new rates wizard. The points that we want to cover today would be how to create a rate, how this rate is utilized through your booking channels, how to add a rate to different room types, how to attach client types and corporate accounts. We'll have quite an in-depth discussion on how our grid works and how that can simplify your building of rates. And also we'll look at how to close a rate and how to utilize length of stay within your rates. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up for you a test hotel, and we're going to look at where we can find our new rates wizard. So the rate wizards will be located underneath your system's configuration, and it's going to be just above the old rates module, and it's named rates wizard. If you do not have access to your rate wizard from here, it is a permissions-based access, so you will need to talk to your systems administrator and have them add your access to Rate Wizard to your login, and then you'll be able to come here and click on Rate Wizard. Once we've opened the Rate Wizard, the main screen we look at is our Rates Wizard dashboard. Now on your dashboard you're looking at any of the rates that you have created. They will show up in alphabetical order. It is also telling you what booking channels you have access to through this rate. So if we look at our best available rate, I can book this through my Hotel Direct. I can use my website, my GDS, and RoomKey also has a central reservation service, which is a unique module to RoomKey. If you have not purchased our central reservation, you do not need to put a checkoff mark here. And then here is telling me that it can be booked directly through my hotel, and it's also telling me that my rate is a daily rate, which means that it is billed each day that the guest is staying, so that my revenue shows up on that day, which means my ADR, my RevPAR, and my TrevPAR will all be correct on a daily basis. Now we're going to look at how to create a brand new rate in RoomKey. So there are basically 3 steps in RoomKey to build a rate. The first one is the plus sign, which is where we are going to build the basic shell for our rate. So we click on the plus sign, and it's now going to open up my Create a New Rate screen. We'll work chronologically down the screen so that we can talk about all of the fields that we are looking at on this screen. So the first field that we see is called Category. These categories are preset up in your system. They are customizable, so it would be whatever you decide you want as your rate categories. And this is basically a way of grouping your rates together as an information screen to know whether or not this is a leisure rate, is it a group rate, is it an online rate, is it a discounted rate. So we see many different properties select many different things. You'll notice up here I have my different rate categories, but they can be anything that you would like this to be. So I'm going to say that this rate that we're going to build is basically a standard rate. And again, this is not actually giving me any reporting, but it is so that when you look at this rate, you can see that this is just a standard rate. It's not anything special. Then we enter the rate name. Now this rate name is going to be visible on reg cards. It's going to be visible on your confirmation. So you want to make sure that you enter in here that's something that makes sense to your clients when they look at this. So we're actually going to call this a Vantage rate. Now we see down below the different channels that we can use to display this rate on. So if you want the rate to be able to be booked directly through your hotel, you will need a check mark next to Hotel Direct. If you wish this to be available on your hotel website through eRes, which most of you on this call are probably not using, you would simply remove the check mark from that box, and you now will no longer be able to see this rate on your website. The central Now the next thing you're going to see is, having created the 2 booking channels that I want to use, over here in More Details, I'm allowed to go in and specify what room types this rate specifically applies to. Now by default, you will always have a rate applied to every single room type. If this rate did not apply to a specific room type, again, as in a toggle switch, I can remove the check mark, and now when I build my rate, my DB suite will not even show up as part of a room type that I can sell for this rate. If I made a mistake, I can toggle switch and put that check mark back in, and now I will be building a rate for all of the room types. We can take this one step further as well, and now I've defined 2 different booking channels. If I click on the plus sign, you'll notice that my 2 booking channels are checked, and if I decided that I did not want this booking channel to be available on the GDS, I can take this particular room type out of the GDS booking. So therefore, when I build my rate, my NSD, NSK, and DB suites will all be available on my GDS and my Hotel Direct, but my NSS will only be available on Hotel Direct. Again, this is a toggle switch, so we can click on the plus sign if I didn't want to take it out. And once I've done that, I apply, and now RoomKey knows which room types I'm going to use and which booking channels I'm going to use. The little star that has shown up next to my central reservation on my hotel website are basically telling me that there are room types not available on those booking channels. So in point of fact, it's all room types because I'm not using those booking channels. The next things that we're looking at is lockoffs, which will not be used. That's only used on our ERES. So if those of you are using ERES, you may want to contact us directly to ask your questions of booking channels. The same with special rates. That is only for our ERES. The next thing that's important for you to note if you're building a standard rate is whether or not the rate is commissionable or not. So any travel agents that you have set up in the system, if that travel agent is applied to a reservation that is using the Vantage rate, do I want to charge commission or not? By putting a check mark in the non-commissionable, it means that no commission will be calculated for that travel agent, even if you attach a travel agent to the rate. If there is no check mark in non-commissionable, by default, whatever the commissionable rate is set up for the travel agent, if the travel agent is attached to that reservation, that is the percentage that they will be afforded for that particular reservation. The sort order here, again, is only on the hotel website, and it would allow you to override the alphabetic listing and select yourself which rates you want to appear in which order on your website. The cutoff dates we'll talk about in a moment, and the number of cells we'll talk about in a moment. The next thing we like to get down to is maximum persons, maximum length of stay, and minimum length of stay. Now by default, when we build room types in RoomKey, we specify the maximum number of people that can go in each room type. So the maximum person here and the maximum and the minimum person here is talking specifically about this rate. So if you were building a rate that is only valid for 2 people, you may want to put in here maximum number of people 2. If it is going to be dependent on the room size and the room type as to how many people can actually book this rate, then you can leave the maximum persons at 0, and then RoomKey will look only at the room inventory to see the maximum number of people that can fit in this room. The next thing we're going to look at is the minimum number of persons. So in order to have a valid reservation, we have to have at least 1 person on the reservation, and length of stay, we have to have at least one person in a length of stay. So one night, one person in order to have a valid reservation. We have the option here when we build periods to have daily, weekly, and monthly. So a daily period means that we actually post the revenue on a nightly basis. If we select to make a weekly rate, it means that we are booking or billing the revenue once every 7 days. So potentially it may overinflate your ADR on the day that you actually bill, but if that's the nature of your business, we can absolutely do a weekly rate. Likewise with monthly, it's going to bill that rate every 30 days, and again, you may have a overinflated revenue on those 30 days because it's not breaking it down daily. So if your business requires weekly or monthly rates, if you can contact Gail directly and she can put you in touch with myself or another trainer, we can certainly walk through how to build a weekly and monthly rate. For the most part, we are going to concentrate today on a daily rate. I will throw in very quickly for those of you that may be on the call that are looking to do daily and monthly and weekly rates. You do have the option if you want the revenue to bill on a daily basis, even if it's a weekly, monthly rate. What you can do is you can go in here and specify that this is actually a daily period in order for it to bill on a daily basis. But you could specify that this is a minimum of 7 days, which means that it basically is a weekly rate. So they'd have to bill it or book it for at least 7 days to get this rate, but it would give you it posting it daily if you've said period daily. And likewise, we could change this to 30 days, and that's giving us a monthly rate because you have to be staying at least 30 days to get this rate. But the fact that we have it billing on a daily basis, that will have your revenue allocated daily rather than on the 7th day and the 30th day. So that's just something for you to think about when you are building your rates. The market segment is a field that is reportable, and if you already have market segments at your property, you can put in your market segments here, and you will be able to then track this rate not only by the rate itself, but you can also track it by market segment. So let's say we may have a leisure market segment here. The base rates you do not use in this new rate wizard. Your description down here is basically the text that you would like to show up to your front desk clerks when they make a booking, and also if you are using our eRes website portal, it will also show up here as well. So if your rate always include breakfast and free parking, you may want to add in here includes breakfast and free parking. Once we've worked our way through this screen, we are ready now to click the Create button, and we are now going to create the shell for our rate. So you'll notice immediately that my Vantage rate has been added to my dashboard, and it indicates that I am using this rate on my GDS, and I'm using it on Hotel Direct, and it is a daily rate. Now we're going to proceed to the second tab, which is our Edit tab, that lets me customize my rate shell. So when I click on my Edit button, you'll see that it does bring back that first screen I was looking at, which is where I built my shell. But I have a number of additional tabs on the top of the screen. So this now will allow me to take this rate and attach it to a particular client type. So when I click on the client type, whatever booking channels I clicked when I built my shell will show up here. So I selected Hotel Direct and GDS. So it's now telling me to select my client type for each of those booking channels. So by clicking on the plus sign, it will expand my lookup, and I can go in here and say, if you are an independent traveler, when you book Hotel Direct, I want you to be able to see my Vantage rate. And if you're on the GDS and you are booking through a GDS, very often people will actually list all their GDSs independently here. But what I've done is I've actually selected just to have 2 booking channels for my GDSs or OTA. And one of them is a guest pay and one of them is a prepay. So in this case, I would want through the OTA the guest to be able to book, and then when they arrive at the hotel, they will prepay their reservation once they arrive at the hotel. If you use virtual credit cards, then it would basically be a prepay so that we know that everything is going to go to folio number 8 and we will receive a virtual credit card from the GDS for us to be able to utilize to pay the room revenue for that particular guest. So now I can update this. Now one step further that we can do is we can have corporate clients, and tomorrow I can discuss with you, on Friday I can discuss with you how we will actually create our corporate clients. But if someone books directly through a GDS and they were a member of a corporate client, I could also select a corporate client here. So now I've done step 1 and step 2. Now we proceed to step 3, which is our next step, and this is where we are actually going to build our rate. So the details of the actual rate and the amounts is where we build on next. So once we get to next, because I left all 4 of my room types accessible to this rate, we will see that all 4 rates are all 4 room types are listed here. If I had have excluded my DB suite, I would only have had 3 room types here, only the non-smoking single, non-smoking double, and non-smoking king. So we're going to talk a little bit now about our grid. So what we're looking at here is something that we call our grid template. And the grid template is utilized within RoomKey for those hotels that have a standard difference between their room types. So for instance, if my room type single is basically the lowest rate that I offer, I would leave that as 0. If my doubles were always $10 more than my single, I can start to create a grid here or a template that will record my differences for each room type. If my king is $20 more, I can put the king in here, and if my suite is $50 more, I can go in and put the differences in here. So to put the differences in, I need to go down to where it says Lock Grid and remove the check mark in order to allow me to get into my grid. Now I can go in and specify for each room type how much is being added per room type. Now if you also add an additional amount based on occupancy, and your rate is basically based on double occupancy, and then it goes up $5 for triple and then $10 for quad, I could definitely go in here and put $15 so that when RoomKey does its rate calculation, it's not only adding the $10 extra for the room type, but it will add $5 for a triple occupancy. And over here, if there's 4 people in the room, it's going to add $20. Then I can go down here and add my $20 and my $20, and again $25 and $30 to include my additional amount based on occupancy. And then if my suite is $50 more, but I'm not adding anything additional for the individuals based on occupancy, then this one I can just leave at $50 across the board, and that will automatically set up for me the $50 additional. Now once I've done this, in order to lock it in so that it will be there for me to use every time I use my Vantage rate, I'm going to go in and say Update Rate Template. When I update my rate template, it means that I have now saved this, and if I come back 6 months from now and have to make a change to my rate, my Vantage rate, this template will automatically be attached to my Vantage rate. So now, once I've built a rate template, I'm ready to proceed through and build my actual rate. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define a period for my rate. So I'm going to take it from now through to the end of the year. Now you'll notice if I click on February, it gives me a list of all my months, and I can click on December, and then I can go back in and click December the 31st. That is actually a function of your Windows operating system. So if you have Windows 8, when you click on the drop-down, you may get something that looks a little different. So we're utilizing whatever your Windows operating system calendar is here to utilize in RoomKey. So if you do go to add a date in here and it looks different, just be aware that is because you are using a different operating system. What you're seeing on my system is Windows 7. So once I've defined the period of my rate, I can go up here and I can put in my base rate. So let's say my base rate is $100. You'll notice immediately when I put my $100 in, because I have an active template, it's automatically calculated that my double room is going to be $10 more than my base rate. So it's made it $110. My king room is $20 more, so it's added that $20 to my 100 base rate and come up with $120. And my suite was $50 more, so it's added it to the 100 and come up with $150. So as I go along here, I can do $100, $100, and $100. And then if I know that anything above the fourth person, I'm still going to charge an extra $10, I can put it in my extra column, and that will actually count the number of guests in my room on the reservation. And once it hits 4, it will then add on the 5th person an additional $10 onto the $120. So 5 people in this room would end up being $130. Again, if you charge for children, you could put the children in here as well. And what that is going to do is it's going to charge an extra, let's get that right, $5 per child. So if you had 5 adults and 1 children, on a single you would be charging $100 plus 10 plus 15 for a rate of $115 per night. If you don't charge anything extra for extra over 4 people, and you don't charge for children, if you leave this blank, basically this is what the highest rate will be in your room. Now once you've built your rate here and you've specified the date period, if your rates should happen to change on Fridays and Saturdays, so let's say you have a higher rate on Saturdays and Sundays, I can go in here and remove the check mark from Friday and Saturday, and this rate will only be built from January the 28th to December the 31st, only valid on Sunday through Thursday. So let's take a look at what that will look like for me when I build the rate. So I need to make sure that I go in and update rate amount. If you don't click on the update rate amount, what will happen is it will not change the rate. You'll still be at the original 0 rate, and it will only show the differential as being the rate for the room. So as long as you update rate, it's now going to take the rates that we see in the template, and when we click on save, it's going to tell me that I've opted to save the rate amounts. If that's correct, I click on OK. And now we always go back to our rate calendar to verify that my rates were done correctly. So if I go into my single and look at one of the booking channels, what I'll be able to see here is that I have a rate of $100 for my singles, Sunday through Thursday, and I do not have a rate for Fridays and Saturdays, which is exactly what I asked RoomKey to do. I can pick my double here and make sure that my rate has gone up by the $10. And I see that I now have 110. If I wish, I can go through and look at each of the room types and check to make sure this one's gone up 20. And then my suite should be 150. So if I'm happy with that rate, I'm now going to go back and build my weekend rate. I'm going to go back to the General tab, and you'll notice in my General tab, it is keeping everything exactly the way it was before. So now I'm going to go in and remove my Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So now I'm saying to Room Key, what I want to do is build a rate that only applies to Friday and Saturday for this date range, which is the same date range that I just used. In order to change the rate, I only have to go up to my top line because my differentials, you'll see, are already still in place. So let's say my default rate on the weekend was $150. All I have to do is go in and just change 4 columns, and I've basically changed my rate for my weekend rate. So now I'm going to go in and make sure I click on Update Rate again, and I'm going to click on Save. Again, I'm just updating Friday and Saturday for this date range. So now when I click on Save, it's going to again confirm that I'm just saving a rate amount. I'm going to say yes, and again, always checking my rate chart. I'm going to, on my rate calendar, I'm going to go in and look at my rate calendar, and now I'm going to see that I have a rate for my weekends, and my rate for my weekends was $150, and I'm looking at my suite, which was $50 more, so I'm getting a $200 rate, and this is going to go all the way through to the end of the year. So every single day I have an inflated rate on the weekend. So now I've built my general rate and I have my inflated rate on my weekends. Let's go ahead and look at what happens if during the year I take a look at my last year's figures and decide that on the Valentine's Day weekend I can afford to raise my rate in general because I was at 100% occupancy for my Valentine's Day. So now I'm going to actually take you out so that I would go into my rate wizard. I would go into the rate that I want to raise, which would be my Vantage rate. I would go into my next field, which is where I actually change the dollar values of my rate. You'll notice that when I get back into my Vantage rate, I still have my template here because I saved it as the first step of building my rate. Now I'm going to go in and specify when I want to change my Vantage rate. So I want to change it actually for the 13th through to the 15th of February. So these dates are inclusive, so it's going to change the rate for the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. So I've now specified my date range. By default, Room Key knows that this is a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday. So there's no Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday that will be changed here. Now I'm going to go back up and I'm going to change my rate to, let's say, $200 for my Valentine's Day. Again, remembering to always click Update Rate if I have made a change to my rate, and then I can click on Save. Room Key again confirming what am I actually changing here, and it's just a rate amount, so I can click on OK. And now basically I have created a rate that is for $200 on that weekend. So I'm going to go to my rate calendar. Again, I'm going to select one of my room types and one of my booking channels. And I'm going to make sure that the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th have their rate raised to $200. So you'll notice that by defining a date range, it doesn't touch anything previous to that date, and it doesn't touch anything after that date. It is only making the change to those specific dates that I have selected. So I can see here that I have a $200 rate on those weekends. Now what this means is if someone comes in on the 11th and books through to the 14th, they are going to end up with a variable rate that will be $100 on the Wednesday and Thursday and will be $200 on the Friday and Saturday. So I don't have to do 2 reservations, one for the regular bar rate and one for a Valentine's Day weekend. This is making sure that I capture as much revenue as possible so I do not have to change to different rates. I don't have to go in and close down my best available rate and only allow my Valentine's rate available on those weekends. We've basically incorporated, if you will, almost 2 rates into one by going in and making the changes as we go through this rate. This also applies to seasonal rates. If you have different rates at different times of the year, instead of building 4 different rates to take in 4 different seasons, I would build just 1 rate and then use your date periods within your general tab to define the increases and or decreases for your different seasons, and that way you will then have a seamless booking process where you don't have to book 3 nights in high season and 2 nights in low season. So I'm hoping that that will help you with capturing as much revenue as possible. The next thing that we're going to look at is if you don't have the ability to be able to standardize your room types, then we would build the rate slightly differently. So I'm going to go back into System Configuration and Rate Wizard. I'm going to use my first step, which is my plus sign to build my shell. I'm going to select a category, which is again going to be a standard rate. I'm going to go into my rate name, and I'm going to call this my, let's call it my rack rate. And then again, it's only going to be available on my GDS. It's going to be available to all room types. And if I click on expand, I can see it's all room types and all booking channels. So I click on apply. It is a commissionable rate. I'm going to add at least 1 person and 1 night. I'm going to go down here and just put this as a basic rate. No parking, and then I create my shell. Once my shell is created, I am going to go into Edit My Shell, and I'm going up to my client types and make sure that this will be available for any independent clients that phone in, and if it's through the GDS, it's going to be prepay, update, and close this down. And now I proceed to my next button, which is where I'm physically going to build the rate. So if you unfortunately do not have a set differential between your room types, then you would need to unlock the grid and basically type in your rates per room type, per occupancy, for each of the columns here. So it's a little bit more labor intensive because each time you change your rate, you basically have to do, on this case, 4 room types times 4 different occupancy levels. So we have to type in 16 different amounts as opposed to putting in here just 4 different amounts. So let's say this was $100 and $100, $100 and $100. And then down here, this was 135 and 135, 135 and 135. And then down here it was 200 and 200 and 200 and 200, whoops. And then down here my suite was 500. I would go in and select my date range. So let's say this is from now until, let's say, the end of February. I would make sure I select update rate, and I would save and click on OK for rate amount. Now when I go in and check my rate calendar, I would be able to see what my rates were and make sure that this has saved my rates successfully. Now, if I have to go back and say on this rate that I wanted to raise the rate, let's say on February the 14th, but it's not going 35 and then 50 and then 400, let's say the difference is something totally bizarre. So let's go in here and say that I'm making the change for February the 14th, so the 13th through to the 15th. And my singles, I know I'm not going to sell very many of on Valentine's Day, so I'm going to leave those at 100. My doubles, I am probably not going to sell, but my queens and my suites are sold profusely on Valentine's Day, so let's change this to 300. So you'll notice that the grid is different now. I couldn't have used that standard grid because I'm just going in and picking an arbitrary amount that is totally different from my Vantage, where I would have stuck with a standard differential per room. And this one I want to make $600. So now I update my rate amount and I save. It's verifying that I want to update my rates, and I say OK. And now when I go back and check my rate calendar to see if this worked correctly, let's pick my King Suite and my Hotel Direct. And I'm going to see that it has changed on those days. But we didn't use a template with that trickle-down effect to change the rate. I actually physically went in and manually keyed over the existing rate to change that rate. So you do have the ability to do that. If you look at your property and say, I can't use a grid because my room types are all different and they change based on the weekends, they change based on my different seasons, then you absolutely can still utilize your general screen as just a rate building screen. Just make sure that you don't save the template. You just want to go in and update it as a rate. So that's basically how we would build our rates in Roomkey. You can go in at any given time and look at your rate adjustments. So I've noticed that the rate changed on December the 13th through to December the 15th. So if I put those dates in there and refresh, Roomkey is going to go out and tell me whether or not there was a rate change made to that. Now this was my initial rate that I built, so it's not showing me a rate change, but if I went out of my rate and came back in, I would see those different rate changes. So if I go back to my main screen and go to that Vantage rate and go to my next, I can find my adjustment history here, and we changed it for that weekend here, and we should be able to refresh. And it's not showing me that history. Maybe I'm on the wrong room type. Okay, I will take a look at that. It should have shown the separate change that I made just for these days, and it would have told me by room type how the rate was changed, whether it was increased or decreased. So your adjustment history is going to be what you can look at in order to be able to see changes. Now, one of the other really nice things about our rate wizard is that we are allowing you to do something called tiered rates. And a tiered rate basically uses one rate as the base rate, and then you can create a second rate off of that original rate, but you can still make changes to the rate that you are tiering. So if you'll notice here, my CAA rate is actually tiered, my Golf and Stay is actually tiered, and my standard rate is actually a tiered rate. So this column is indicating tiered rates. So let's go into our CAA rate and take a look at what tiering has done for this rate. So the first thing you'll see is when you go into your CAA rate, you'll notice that there are no rates in here. So I would then go up to my rate tiering, and I can see here that what we have done is on my CAA rate, I've activated rate tiering. It is being tiered off of my standard rate, and it's telling me that if I make a rate change in my standard rate, apply that rate change to my CAA rate. If I close my rate, my standard rate, close my CAA rate. If I put a length of stay restriction on my standard rate, then put a length of stay on my CAA rate as well. So basically, I am mirroring my standard rate. However, I've also got something called a calculation formula, which allows me to make an across-the-board change to the standard rate. So in this case, I'm saying that the rate is going to be a 10% dollar amount. So I have the option to it either be a flat amount or a percentage. Now, most often the CAA is actually a percentage rather than a dollar amount. So here it would be saying make a 10% change to my standard rate, and then I can either raise it or lower it, and we use a greater than or a less than sign to decide if I want to raise or lower the rate. Now, we do help you if you are not 100% sure of what these signs mean by putting a line of text down here that actually tells you right now with the symbol I'm using here, my CAA rate is actually 10% more than my standard rate. So if that's not correct, I can go up and click again, and now it says my CAA rate is actually 10% less than my standard rate. So that's what I want to achieve. I want a rate that's 10% less than my standard rate, and anything that's done to my standard rate, I also want to apply to my CAA rate. So for instance, on that Valentine's Day weekend, if I raised my rate in the standard rate, it would also have raised my CAA rate, but then applied the 10% discount to the elevated rate to give me still a discounted rate on that weekend for CAA. The next thing that we're going to look on the bottom of the screen is some hotels like to maintain their rates at a nice round dollar figure. So it's $100, $150, $159, but not $100.42. So we do give you the ability here to round your rates if you want to. So if we're calculating a percentage discount, more than likely you are going to end up with cents in your value for that particular room. If you're okay with cents, you would leave the rounding at the cents. If you wanted to have your rate rounded, you would click on the dollar, and what this will do is anything that is 50 cents and less, it will round it down to the closest dollar, and 51 cents and higher, it will round it up to the next dollar. So it will maintain your dollar integrity rather than cents. Once you've done rate tiering, you need to make sure, just like we had to click on update rates in order for the rate change to take place, here we need to click on apply changes now and save, and this is now going to go through to my CAA rate and basically take that rate and make it 10% less than my standard rate. Let's build a tiered rate from scratch so we can see how we actually do that. So it does require us to have a rate shell to start off with. So let's click on the plus sign. The rate category, I may want to have a discounted rate category type if I wanted to. So let's call this a senior rate. Let's make it our AARP rate. Again, I want to remove the booking channels that I don't want. I'm not going to bother to look here in more details because I want it for all of my room types. I need to make sure I have my minimum and maximum people and nights. I can go into my standard market segment in here. And down here, I do want to put in here that AARP card must be presented at check-in. And then I can create. I still need to edit that shell and attach it to the booking types that I want or the client types that I want. So under my hotel, I want it to be independent or a leisure guest. And here it's my prepay and update. Now it's when I get to my next button that it changes if I am doing a tiered rate. So on here, I don't need to put a date range. I don't need a template because it's going to pick everything up from the tiered rate that I select. So if I go down here and say my AARP is actually going to be tier enabled off of my Vantage rate. So I put my Vantage rate in there. Do I want, every time I make a change in my Vantage rate, do I want to change my AARP? I do. If I close my AARP, my Vantage rate, do I want to close my AARP? I do. And if I put a length of stay on my Vantage rate, do I want to put a length of stay on my AARP? So I do. Now I'm going to go down and let's make this a 12% less than. Verify that that's what I've done. So I've got 12% less. And I do want to round it to the closest dollar. I apply my changes now and save. So now if I go up into my rate calendar, what I'm going to see is if I pick a room type, let's say our King, and I look at my Hotel Direct, I'm going to see that my rate should be elevated on the weekends because my Vantage rate was elevated on the weekends. I should see that that increase that I added for my Valentine's Day weekend is also added in here as well. But I can also see that I have maintained my rounded dollar value in here. So everything that I have done in my Vantage rate is basically showing up here in my AARP rate. The exception is that there is a 12% discount on this rate. If I go back to my rate tiering and I go in and I say that I didn't want the dollar rounding, and I apply the changes now and save. When I go back and look at my rate calendar, what I should see is that now my rates will probably have cents on them. See, 60 cents on here. So it really depends on how you want your rates to show up, whether or not you want to utilize this rounding or not. And always apply changes now and save. So if you did not want any rate changes to be applied, then we would simply not put we would remove that rate amount. And now if I went into my Vantage rate and changed it, it would not change my triple or my AARP rate. What we are going to do now is talk a little bit about closing rates, and we're going to talk a little bit about length of stay. So I'm going to go back to my main page, and I'm going to pick up my Vantage rate again, and I'm going to go into my next screen, which is where I'm going to be able to control my different rules as far as closing, opening, length of stay. So the first thing that it does require, if you'll notice these are all shaded out at this point in time, it does require for me to specify a rate or a date. So let me take from the 30th to the 31st of January. As soon as I've selected a date range, you'll notice that I now have access to be able to go in, open and close rates, and add a length of stay. Now the NTS stands for number of nights to sell and is only available if you use ERES. So again, I'm not going to touch on this. If you do have ERES and you need to know more about this, please contact the sales department and they'll be able to direct you to who you should speak to. So let's talk about close to arrival and close and what the difference is between the two of them. So close to arrival is used mostly for properties that are, for instance, timeshare condos, where they try to get everybody to arrive on a Saturday or to arrive on a Sunday. So close to arrivals would simply be, I would close Monday through Thursday and only allow you to be available to book on the Friday. So let's go in here and pick, let's say, from the 30th to, let's go out a month, to the 29th, and I'm going to go through and say that I'm closing it to arrivals only on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. So I want people to arrive on Fridays and Saturdays. Oh, and let's remove Sunday as well. So now I'm telling Roomkey between January the 30th and February 27th, if it's a Friday or a Saturday, I want to close to arrivals. Once I've done that, I don't need to update rate, otherwise I will override my rate with this 0 rate. So this is one of the situations where I simply click on the Save button, and it says to me, okay, you're not changing your rates, all you're doing is closing to arrival. So if I'm okay with that, I click on OK. And now if I look at my calendar and I select my room type, I'm going to see that for that period, those dates for the weekend are red. And what that means is I could make a reservation coming in on Wednesday the 4th and leaving on Friday the 6th. I could have a reservation coming in on Friday, leaving on Sunday, but I could not have a reservation coming in on Friday or Saturday. So this means that I am closed to arrivals for these days. Now if I go back and I say, in point of fact, what I wanted to do was close to arrivals on Friday and Saturday. So I've got close to arrivals Saturday and Friday instead. I'm going to go in and save, and I'm just saving close to arrivals. And what you're going to see here when I go back is that I have red on those days that are close to arrivals. Now you'll notice every single day is close to arrivals, so that's not going to work very well for me. And that is because I did not remove my close to arrivals on Friday and Saturday. So let's go back to my general and see now how we clear close to arrivals. So if I want to remove my close to arrivals on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, but still leave Friday and Saturday for this date range close to arrivals, I simply go in, and in this case I'm going to remove Friday and Saturday because I don't want my clear close to arrival to apply to those. I'm putting my check marks back in here, and I'm saying to room key, clear my close to arrivals. So for this date range, if it's a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, clear the arrivals. If it's a Friday or Saturday, leave the existing rule in place. So now when I save my close to arrivals and I go back to my rate calendar, I'm going to see that I have cleared my Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but I have left my Friday and Saturday open. So that's what a close to arrival will do for you. Now I'm actually going to go back and clear my close to arrival completely for all days. So I'm doing clear arrival Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday for this date range. And I should just go back up and check and make sure that I now have all days open to book, which I do. So the next thing we're going to talk about is actually closing a rate. So a closing a rate means that it's not closed to arrival. I actually do not want to take any bookings on that day. So let's say I'm closed for Christmas, or you close down for your Thanksgiving. This is where you would actually close the rate completely, and room key would not allow you to make any bookings on that day. So let's take the 30th through to the 31st. And again, you select your date range. It tells me that this is a Friday and Saturday, and I want to close the rate. And I click on Save. So now it's telling me I'm closing the rate. That is correct. So I click on OK. And when I verify my calendar, I'm going to be able to go in and see that those dates actually are going to be yellow. And yellow basically means that they are closed to rates. So if someone tried to book on Friday the 30th, the Vantage rate would not show up. So be aware, this is closing rates. This is not closing your entire hotel. It's just closing particular rates. So your Vantage rate is being closed down for those days. You'll notice that it does tell you here that if your rate calendar is red, it is because you have no rate set up for that. So we started our rates today, which is why this calendar is red previous to those dates. Now let's talk a little bit about length of stay. So a length of stay allows you within the rate itself to define date periods within that rate that you want to put a minimum length of stay. So let's go back to our Valentine's Day weekend and say, I've told them that I am elevating the rate, but you know what? I'm also going to lock them into a minimum of a 2-day stay. So they can stay the 13th and the 14th and the 15th, but they have to stay at least 2 nights on my Valentine's Day weekend. So again, I specify my date range, and I'm then able to see which days of the week those are, so I can verify that it's my Friday, Saturday, and my Sunday. I'm going to activate my length of stay, and I want to do a minimum of 2 days, and I really don't care how long they stay. If they wanted to stay 10 days, they can do that as well, but they have to stay at least 1 day. So once I put this in, again, I'm not updating my rates because it would then pick this up and it would skew my rates. So I only have to go down and click on Save. And once I've done that, it now tells me, okay, you're changing your length of stay. Is that correct? And I say yes. And now when I go up to my calendar, what I'm going to see is that in the corner of the day, it's actually going to say 2/0. So 2 is my minimum days, /0 is my maximum days. So if I said that this had to be a minimum 2, maximum of 3 days, it would actually say 2/3 to tell me that it was a minimum of 2 nights, maximum of 3 nights. So at this point in time, I've been able to put a minimum 2-day stay on that weekend. And what you're going to see now is if I go back to my main page and I go through and I look at any of the rates that I had tiered off of the Vantage rate, those would be changed as well, and they would also have the minimum 1 or 2 day stay applied to those as well. The next thing that I'm going to show you is, now that we've built a basic rate and we've seen how to create the rate, how the booking channels are attached, and how we need to call room key if we do add a new rate. If you change the rate, you don't have to contact room key, because the rates that you have, I believe with Synexus, you are controlling the rates from your property, so any changes you make to existing rates will automatically go up. It's only if you add a new rate that you need to contact room key, and we will go ahead and load that new rate and link it. We've seen how we can have different room types attached to different rates, and we can even attach them based on different booking channels. We have attached a client type to the guest. We also have looked at the grid and how the grid works, and how it's not mandatory to use the grid, that you can absolutely build your rates in the grid itself and not save the grid, and that gives you the ability to go in and just ignore room type differentials and just build the rate. And we've also closed our rates and put length of stays on our rate. The next thing we are going to look at is what we can do to actually look at reports for our rates. So from any rate at any given time, you can go into your rate calendar, and when you look up your rate calendar, you can print your rate calendar. So when you've looked at your rate, you'll notice that there is a print button down here, and when you select the print button, it will actually print your rate, and you can print this rate based on the rate template, on rate tiering, or on GDS. So let's select this for here. So we're saying rate template, and it says, do you want to show this room type for all rates? So you can go in again, it's a toggle, so you can add or you can put them back in again. And then when I print, what I'm going to see is basically a report that is telling me that this is my standard rate. It's a hotel direct rate. It is not an online rate. It is a GDS, and it is not a central reservation. So this means that these are the booking channels that you put the check mark in. We don't have a maximum number of people, but we do have a minimum number of people, 1, which is what we've talked about. In order to have a valid reservation, you need to do that. Minimum length of stay is 1 night. This one actually has a maximum length of stay of 14 nights. Is it a tiered rate? Yes, it is. Is it tiered to open and close? No. And is it tiered on length of stay? No. So this particular standard rate is a tiered rate that is allowing the rate to change, but no closing and no length of stay. If I've attached it to a client type, it's listing me here for me the different client types that my standard rate is attached to. And down here under corporate, it would show me any corporate accounts that it was listed to. And going forward, you'll see one more, and we're going to be discussing that on our next session, which is groups. And I would see any groups that this was attached to. So let's go down and take a look at the Vantage rate that we built and see how that one looks like. So here is my Vantage rate. It is an active rate. It's hotel direct. It's not online. It is on the GDS. It has a minimum maximum person stays. I had left my 30 days on the front, so it's actually still a 30-day. It's bookable through Independence and through OTA prepay. This is my differential that's showing up here, not my actual rate type, but my differential. So this is basically showing me how this rate is being built. And then if I go down and I look at my AARP rate, you'll notice that it tells me again hotel direct GDS, 1 night minimum, 1 person minimum, and that it is tiered off of my Vantage rate with a 12% less calculation, and it is tiering rates. it's tiering closed length of stay, and it's also tiering AARP. You'll notice that the rates are 0 because it can't really display any rates for tiered rate because it is depending on what is on my Vantage rate to show those rates as my tiered rates. So that's printing your rate directly from your rate wizard. We can also go into your main dashboard under reports and rate reports. And from your rate reports, you can go in and select a GDS template, and a rate template, and that basically is the same thing as we looked at from within the rate wizard, but you don't have to be in the rate wizard. You can do it from here. Or we could have done that same report, rates report, and this time I'm going to say, just show me anything that is tiered. So this time it says, here's your Vantage rate, and your Vantage rate has the AARP rate tiered off of it. It's tiered off at a 20% or 12% less, and anything that you do in Vantage in the way of rates, close to arrivals or length of stay, will also apply to the AARP rate. So this is a good way if you are trying to figure out what rates your tiered rates are tiered off of. You can print your tiered rate and it will show you that. Now, one quick thing before I open the floor up to questions is I want to show you how we can, in essence, copy a rate. So if you have a rate that, let's say a corporate rate, and it's a corporate negotiated rate, and you've negotiated it for IBM, but then you go negotiate a rate for Xerox, and it's actually exactly the same rate. But you do want on the reservations for the reservations confirmation to show that they're getting the IBM rate or the Xerox rate. So basically I want to take exactly the same rate and duplicate it. What we can do then is it's basically a tiered rate. So we will go through the steps that we did for tiering, which is creating our rate shell, putting it into a category, giving it a name, and I'm just going to call it copy so that we know that this is a copied rate, determining the channels that we're going to use, keep the room types as all room types, give myself a minimum and a maximum length of stay, leave it as a daily rate. I can put it into a market segment. I can put a description if I want to. Create my rate. Go in here, and if I already had my companies built, and this does rely on me having the companies built already, I would need to go in here and select my company, but we'll discuss companies on the next session. I'm going to actually make it visible to leisure guests. So my client type would be my independent or my leisure guest. And now when I go through and take next, I'm going to use my rate tiering, and I'm going to tier this off of my standard rate. And you'll notice that if I don't have a calculation formula in here, it says equal to the standard rate. So in other words, this is in essence copying that rate. So it's going to be exactly the same as my standard rate. I still have my options to be able to go through just copy rate. If I close the standard rate, do I want to change the standard rate? If I don't, and this is a negotiated rate, and if in the future I go through and I change the IBM rate, but I don't want it to affect this rate, then I would not put any check marks in here, and that means that this standard rate is going to stay exactly as it is now. So if I apply changes now and save, it means that this rate is going to stay the same regardless of if the other rate changes. So let's go back to our main page, and I think at this point we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to take a look at the questions or open up the floor if you would like to write in some questions, and I can see that I do have some questions. Okay, how can you close out an entire property for a given date range? That's an excellent question. So one of the things that you will see if we take a look back here is that I have a best available rate. Now, a lot of properties will go through and they will actually use a best available rate, and they will tier all other rates off of their best available rate. And that means that if they want to close out their property, they can go into their best available rate and close the best available rate. And in essence, that closes all of the tiered rates, which in case has actually closed everything in your property. If you don't have tiered rates, the only way to close your entire property is to go through and to close each individual rate for those date ranges. Now, there are different ways if you want to close different things in your property. So, for instance, if you're closing down a wing or a series of rooms in your property and you want to take those out of availability, then you can certainly do that using off-market. But if it's to close down your entire hotel, you would either have to take every room in your hotel off-market for that date period, or you would have to come in and close all of your room types or all of your rates for that period. Let me see if there are any other questions. It says, can you send out invitations for the webinar taking place on Friday? I believe that you should have received those already. That is from Cam. So Cam, if you don't have that, I do believe that Nav is still on the call, and Nav is the person who is administrating these webinars. I think that she would be able to send you an invitation if you haven't received one already. How do you delete a rate? So if you want to delete a rate, we strongly suggest that you don't do that, because historically you do have rates already attached to reservations, and by deleting a rate you're going to end up having fields that don't have valid information in. The best way to go in and delete a rate or get rid of a rate in RoomKey is to go into the main screen of the rate wizard and select the edit screen. And if you go into the edit screen and remove all of your booking channels, that will remove the rate from being visible when you go in to make a reservation. Now, if it's a GDS rate, again, if you want to remove it off the GDS, you do need to contact RoomKey because the linking is still in place. So we need to take that linking off to make absolutely sure that that rate is also removed from your GDS. But once you've removed all of your booking channels and you update, you will see that you now have a rate that has nothing in it except it says tiered enable, but that's fine, but it has no booking channels in it. So that means that that rate is no longer available. Now, if it's a rate that is no longer available and you don't even want to use it anymore, let's say you no longer have a golf course, it's been paved over and it's now a parking lot. What I've seen people do in the past as well is actually change the name of that rate and put a Z or a Z in front of it and update it. And what that will do is it will cause it to jump to the bottom of the list. So you've still got the history attached to it because it's now actually gone back to every reservation that had the rate copy on it, and it's now, those rates are all called Z copy, but it's now jumped to the bottom of the screen. And again, actually I should have done that with the golf and stay, should have called that one Z. So that one will now drop down to the bottom as well, so that you won't be able to see it. So if you've got multiple rates that's now dropping off the end of the screen, then you won't see that anymore. So hopefully that answers the question. Let's see if we have any more. Okay, so the question from Cam is, how do I transfer my existing rates from my old system to the Rate Wizard? That will be covered on the webinar on Friday. We'll go into detail, and in fact, Cam, I will probably, if you don't mind, use your property as my sample property, and we can start moving some of your rates for that property, if that's okay with you. Okay, super, Cam. So I don't actually see any more questions on my question screen. So I'm hoping that this has been helpful to everybody. I hope that you will join us on our next session for how to take your rates from the old rate module to the new rates wizard. And hopefully any new rates going forward, you'll be able to use the rate wizard. Don't forget that you can go to our website. You can go to the online help, and if you type in Rate Wizard, you will get the documentation that goes along with this webinar that is a full manual on Rate Wizard, including how to move your rates across. So I would like to thank everybody for participating today, and I look forward to seeing you on Friday. Thank you very much.